Have you ever felt like you've given everything, yet your children seem more distant than ever? You sacrifice, you love, but all you get in return is indifference. If you believe that the more you give, the more your children will respect you, be careful. That might be the biggest mistake. So how do you earn their true respect? The secret isn't in what you say, but in how you live. Do these 6 things inspired by Keanu Reeves, and you'll see the change. Don't forget to follow, so you won't miss more essential lessons about life and family. There comes a time in life when the roles between parents and children begin to shift. You spend decades raising them, guiding them, sacrificing for them. But then one day, you realize everything has changed. Maybe they ignore your advice. Maybe they dismiss your opinions. Maybe they speak to you in a tone you never imagined hearing from them. Or worse, they make you feel like a burden. And that pain cuts deep. If your children have started treating you with disrespect, you might feel frustrated, even furious. In that moment, you may want to remind them of everything you've done for them. The years you put them first, the sleepless nights spent worrying, the personal dreams you set aside so they could have a better future. But the truth is, anger won't fix it. In fact, it only makes things worse. When you respond with frustration and blame, all you get in return is defensiveness, distance, and endless arguments. And that's not what you want, is it? So what should you do? How do you regain your child's respect without conflict, criticism, or resentment? There is a better way, one that allows you to maintain your dignity while inspiring your children to value you again. It's not about reminding them of your sacrifices or demanding gratitude. It's about how you handle this shift with calm, strength, and deep understanding. Today, I'll share 6 things you can do when your children no longer respect you. These aren't complicated or difficult changes. On the contrary, they're simple adjustments with powerful effects, small shifts in how you respond that can completely transform the way your children see you. Some of them may surprise you, but if you stay with me until the end, you'll discover how to reclaim your place as someone who is valued, respected, and truly appreciated within your own family. Let's begin. The first thing is stop chasing your child's approval. One of the biggest mistakes parents make, especially as they get older, is trying too hard to please their children. Maybe you've noticed this in yourself. You go out of your way to accommodate them, even at the cost of your own needs, just to avoid conflict. You say yes when deep down you want to say no. You put their desires above everything else, hoping that if you sacrifice enough, they'll appreciate and respect you more. But reality doesn't always work that way. The more you chase their approval, the less they respect you. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's the truth. Respect doesn't come from endless self-sacrifice. It comes from valuing yourself. If you constantly bend, compromise, and shrink yourself just to keep the peace, you unintentionally teach them that your feelings and needs don't matter. And once that belief settles in their minds, you become someone easy to dismiss, someone whose presence carries little weight in their lives. So don't lose yourself in the pursuit of your child's affection, because when you truly recognize your own worth, your children will begin to see you differently through the lens of respect. I once knew a woman named Sarah. She had been strong and independent in her younger years, the kind of person who could handle anything, decisive and resilient. But over time, she stepped back, letting her children make all the decisions. She rearranged her schedule to fit their needs, kept her thoughts to herself, and even ignored the disrespectful way they sometimes spoke to her. "I just want to keep the family together," she once told me. But what happened? Her children gradually stopped seeing her as someone worth listening to. They viewed her as someone who would always concede, always accept, always stay silent. She thought she was preserving harmony, but in reality, she was losing her voice. And once you allow others to get used to you stepping aside, they start expecting it. If your children no longer respect you, the first step is not to demand it. You don't need to beg for respect from anyone. Instead, stop acting as if you depend on it. Set boundaries. Say no when necessary. Speak up, even when they don't like what you have to say. Because when you respect yourself, when you stand firm in your worth, the way your children see you will shift. Maybe not overnight, maybe not without some resistance, but respect will return, because it always starts with you. The second, don't argue, Lead by example when your children dismiss your opinions, talk over you, or treat you with a lack of respect. Your first instinct may be to argue, to remind them of everything you've sacrificed, to demand that they listen. But let me share something that might save you years of frustration. Arguing never works. Think about it. When was the last time you earned someone's respect by debating with them? Respect doesn't come from sharp words or passionate arguments. It cannot be demanded, it must be built. Not through words, but through your demeanor, through how you stand your ground, through how you respond when someone tests your patience. If you react to disrespect with anger, you're unknowingly reinforcing their belief that they can control your emotions, that they have power over you. And the more they sense that, the further away respect drifts. My former neighbor, a man named James, was a retired teacher. In his classroom, he commanded attention and respect with unwavering confidence. He spent his life guiding students, earning their admiration through his wisdom and presence. But in his own home, things were different. His grown children gradually began treating him like an outsider. They dismissed his advice, brushed off his concerns, and sometimes even laughed when he tried to correct them. At first, James argued. He fought to prove he was still worthy of their respect. But the harder he tried, the worse it got. Every time he raised his voice in frustration, his children pulled further away. Every time he struggled to reclaim his position, he lost a little more of his presence in their lives. Then one day, James decided to change. Instead of arguing, he started listening, really listening. He stopped trying to earn respect with words. He no longer fought to prove his worth. Instead, he carried himself as someone who already knew his value. He remained calm. He spoke with wisdom and experience, not out of desperation to be heard, but with quiet certainty. Slowly, his children began to notice. They no longer saw a father desperate for their approval, but a man who stood firm in his own identity. A man who didn't beg for recognition, but embodied strength and dignity. If your children don't respect you, don't fight them for it. Teach them respect through the way you treat yourself. Hold your ground. Speak with quiet confidence. And most importantly, never lower yourself to meet their disrespect. Because when you stand firm without force, when you demonstrate steady resolve without imposition, they will feel it. And in time, they will follow your lead. The third, letting go of emotional dependence. One of the hardest lessons to learn as we grow older is accepting that we cannot rely on our children to fill the emotional void in our lives. You may love your children with all your heart. You may long for them to love and respect you the way you sacrifice for them. But the moment they sense that you need them to feel valued, the balance in your relationship shifts. What's the truth? People, including your own children, respect those who are emotionally independent. If you rely on them for validation, love, or attention, you are unintentionally placing an invisible burden on their shoulders. And that burden does not inspire gratitude. It creates a sense of obligation. They begin to pull away, growing impatient, even resentful. And the more you crave their affection, the more distant they become. A woman I once knew, Jessica, was a devoted mother who had dedicated her entire life to her children. But as they grew older and became consumed with their careers and families, she found herself fading into the background of her own life. She spent hours by the phone, waiting for a call. When none came, she reached out first. Once, then twice, then every single day. Each time they spoke, she reminded them how much she missed them, how she wished they would visit, how lonely she felt in her empty home. But instead of drawing them closer, she unknowingly pushed them further away. Over time, Jessica's calls were no longer moments of heartfelt connection, but obligations her children felt they had to fulfill. They no longer answered with excitement. They picked up out of guilt. Then one day, Jessica decided to change. She stopped waiting. She stopped making the first call. Instead, she began focusing on herself, learning new hobbies, meeting friends, nurturing her own joy and independence. She no longer placed her happiness in the hands of her children. And something unexpected happened. Her children began calling her more. They no longer saw her as a lonely mother waiting for their attention, but as a self-sufficient woman with a full and meaningful life. They started respecting her time, cherishing the moments they shared with her. The lesson here is simple. The less you depend on your children for a sense of self-worth, the more valuable you become in their eyes. When you show that you can stand strong and find happiness without their validation, they will respect you, not out of duty, but because they genuinely admire the life you have built for yourself. And most importantly, you won't just regain your children's respect, you will rediscover yourself. But if your children continue to behave the same way, it's not because they are bad people. It's because human nature, especially within families, dictates that people will treat you in the way you allow them to. The fourth step, setting boundaries doesn't mean cutting off relationships or creating conflict. It means calmly but firmly defining what you will and will not accept, and more importantly, standing by those boundaries when they are crossed. This reminds me of a story about my old friend Robert, a retired businessman. He had spent his entire life running his company with discipline and confidence. But when it came to dealing with his grown children, he struggled. They frequently interrupted him, dismissed his opinions, and even criticized the way he lived. At first, Robert endured it. He told himself, it's not worth the argument. But over time, he realized that every time he stayed silent, he was teaching his children that their behavior was acceptable, and that needed to change. One day, Robert decided to do things differently. When his son interrupted him, he didn't lash out or react harshly. Instead, he calmly said, "Go ahead and speak when you're actually ready to listen." When his daughter dismissed his perspective, he gently responded, "You don't have to agree with me, but that doesn't mean my opinion doesn't deserve to be heard. I don't expect you to agree, but I do expect you to show respect." And when his children continued to push his limits, Robert stood his ground. "If you can't treat me with basic respect, then I have no reason to continue spending time with you." Something unexpected happened. At first, they resisted. They were annoyed and tried to push his boundaries further. But when they realized their father would no longer back down, they started to listen. Robert had shown his children that he valued himself enough to demand respect. And because of that, they slowly learned to treat him with the dignity they had once denied him. If your children don't respect you, it's time to ask yourself, are you allowing it? Because if you don't set boundaries, they won't set them for you. And if you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. The fifth step, stop giving unconditionally if it's not appreciated. One of the quickest ways to lose someone's respect is to give without receiving appreciation in return. As parents, we often fall into this trap without even realizing it. We give our children our time, energy, and support, even when it goes unnoticed, even when they take it for granted, even when they respond with nothing but more demands. But what's the truth? When you keep giving without gratitude, you're not building love, nor are you fostering respect. You're only creating entitlement. Over time, your kindness loses its value. It's no longer seen as a gift, but as an obligation you're expected to fulfill. And when you finally stop, they don't feel grateful. They feel inconvenienced. Let me tell you about David, a father who was always generous with his children. He never hesitated to help them financially whenever they needed it. He put his own life on hold to support them, even reshaping his world to fit their needs. But what did he get in return? Not a single thank you, not a trace of appreciation. Instead, they only demanded more. And the worst part, when David finally needed help, his children were too busy. But one day, he decided to make a change. He stopped sacrificing himself unconditionally. He no longer rushed to help before his children even had to ask. More importantly, he started saying no when necessary. At first, his children were confused, even upset. They couldn't understand why the father who had always given everything suddenly wasn't willing to sacrifice anymore. But then, something changed. Slowly, they began to value his time. They realized his efforts weren't obligations, but gifts. Because when generosity is no longer infinite, when love is no longer given, people start to understand that care and kindness aren't things to demand. They're things to cherish. If you feel like your children don't respect your time, effort, or kindness, take a step back. Ask yourself, am I giving more than I should? And if the answer is yes, what would happen if I stopped? Because when you teach others that your generosity exists only where respect does, they will begin to treat you accordingly. The last one, build a life beyond your children. One of the most powerful ways to regain your children's respect is to show them that your happiness does not solely revolve around them. As parents, it is natural to devote all our love and attention to our children. We see them as the center of our world, the reason we push forward each day. But as time passes, the balance shifts. If you have spent your entire life prioritizing your children above all else, they may start to see you as nothing more than a parent, someone who exists solely in relation to them. People respect those who have their own goals, interests, and a meaningful life beyond their family. If your children see that you depend entirely on them for joy, validation, or a sense of purpose, they may feel suffocated. Worse, they may begin to view you as someone who has no life of your own. Helen was a widow in her 70s. After her husband passed away, she poured all her energy into her children's lives. She called them every day, constantly checking in, offering advice even when it wasn't needed. She hoped they would fill the void left by her late husband. But instead of bringing them closer, it pushed them away. The phone calls became less frequent, the visits even rarer. Helen felt lonelier than ever. Then one day, she made a decision. She joined a book club. She started traveling with friends. She signed up as a volunteer at the local community center. She stopped centering her entire existence around her children. And then, something incredible happened. Her children started reaching out. They became curious about what she was doing, the places she was visiting, the people she was meeting. They admired her independence. Because when you have a vibrant life of your own, people don't just respect you, they're drawn to you. Helen's children respected her because she was no longer just a mother waiting for their attention. She was a person with a rich and fulfilling life. So, if you feel that your children no longer respect you, ask yourself, do they see you as someone who is truly living or as someone merely waiting for their attention? Because when you show them that you're living, not just existing, you will completely change the way they see you. I want you to take a moment to reflect on this. If what I'm sharing resonates with you, leave a comment below and let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the follow button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future content. Your support motivates me to continue sharing valuable lessons and inspiring more people. Finally, remember this. Respect is not something you can demand from your children. It is something you inspire through the way you live, the boundaries you set, and the way you treat yourself. If your children have started treating you with indifference, neglect, or a lack of respect, don't waste your energy being angry. Instead, change your approach. Stop seeking their validation. Because the less you rely on others for approval, the more respect you will earn. The less you need recognition, the more you will receive it. Be a role model because your dignity speaks louder than words. Detach yourself emotionally because the more independent you are, the more respect you command. Set boundaries because people will only treat you the way you allow them to. Stop giving endlessly if it is not appreciated because kindness, when taken for granted, loses its value. And above all, build a life that is not solely centered around your children because people with purpose, joy, and passion of their own will always be respected. If you do these things, something remarkable will happen. Your children will no longer see you as someone merely waiting for their attention, but as someone worthy of admiration, someone who lives with dignity, strength, and self-respect. And then, the respect you long for will return to you, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. Life does not wait for anyone, and neither does respect. If you want your children to see you differently, start with the way you live. Remember, you cannot force respect. You must inspire it. And when you reclaim your own value, your children will see it too. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If this message has given you a new perspective, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments. You never know, your story might inspire someone else out there. And if you want to continue exploring profound lessons about life and family, hit like, share, and subscribe. We have so many meaningful discussions ahead. See you in the next video.